This is how to get rich, the boring way that actually works. Now, just to be clear, I'm not rich, I'm not a finance guru, and I'm definitely not selling anything. This is just what worked for me over the years since I started learning about finance. We'll start with mindset, because without the right mindset, nothing else in this video even matters. Firstly, forget about get rich quick. That mindset will keep you poor. Also, forget about trying to look rich. Looking rich and being rich are often the opposite. Building real wealth requires patience, delaying gratification, doing stuff now that's going to benefit you in the future. If you can master patience, you're ahead of most of the world, because most people want to get rich right now. If you've got the right mindset, then the first thing you should start doing right now is learning. Read. I read my first book 8 years ago, and it was a finance book, and that totally changed the way I thought about money. And I'm so glad I read that book, and I learned so much from that book, I decided to keep reading. You need to learn how money actually works, how the stock market works, property, credit, good debt versus bad debt, debts that'll keep you trapped, or debts that you can actually use strategically. Yes, this video is designed to teach you, but the learning never stops. Make a habit of learning and reading. That was the main thing that changed my life more than anything. The best investment you'll ever make, in my opinion, is understanding money. So step 1 is your mindset. Step 2 is learning. Step 3 is to spend less than you earn. This is non-negotiable. If you can't spend less than you earn, you can't possibly build wealth. If this seems impossible, you have two options: reduce your spending or increase your income. Usually a little bit of both. Now, that doesn't mean living a miserable life. What it does mean is making sacrifices. You might have to sacrifice driving a fancy car. You might need to buy a basic car instead. Not wearing fancy designer clothes, not buying status symbols. It might even mean living in a cheaper house. When I bought my first house, I bought a property that was a lot cheaper than I could afford because I wanted money available to invest every month. Just a side note, your home is not an asset. An asset puts money in your pocket. Even if your house goes up in value, you still need somewhere to live, and you're also paying mortgage, interest, maintenance, and other ongoing costs. Now, I believe that for most people in the UK, home ownership is better than renting. It depends on your situation, but for a lot of people, owning a home is better than renting. A lot of the time, renting is more expensive than paying a mortgage monthly. However, don't mistake owning a home with building wealth. So sacrifices that I've made personally to try to build wealth: I purchased properties that are cheaper than what I could afford. I drive a Ford Fiesta. I don't wear designer clothes, and I don't have a Rolex. They are my sacrifices. Yours will be different. For me, what I'm not prepared to sacrifice is holidays. I like to go away, and I like to eat in restaurants sometimes. So they are my non-negotiables. So it changes for everyone. What I will say is that anything that's designed to make you look rich, anything you were buying for status, that needs to go. That is the first thing to sacrifice. Also, another side note, when somebody pulls up in a flashy car, most people don't think they're rich. Most people just assume debt, and usually they're right. Now, it's very common for people to get to the end of the month and have no money left, but to have no idea where that money actually went. If that's the case for you, I recommend going through your bank statements and working out where your money's going. Take note of the different areas that you're spending your money, because some will be bills that you can't change, but then it might be going out for drinks or meals with friends. It might be subscriptions. It can be all sorts of different things. A lot of it will be recreational that you would be able to reduce. A lot of it will be things that can't be reduced. And the idea isn't to not spend any money on fun. You need to have a good life, but you might find an area where you think, wow, I didn't realize I was spending that much on this. You might find that you're spending 100 quid a month on gambling. You might think that you're only putting in a little bit on a weekend when you're with friends and it's not really an issue, but when you actually add it all up, you might find that it's £100 a month, and that might be something you need to change. You might enjoy going out for drinks with friends now and again, but you might realize you're spending hundreds a month on that. And if that's the case, I'm not saying that you'd want to stop doing that altogether, but that's probably an area where you could reduce your spending. It's going to be totally different for everyone. No two people are the same. So you just got to go through your bank statements, work out where you're spending your money, and see if there's an area where you could reduce it. Hopefully, you'll find a few areas that you can reduce your spending in, and put them all together. That could make a big difference. I touched briefly there on gambling, and that I'd just like to talk about a little bit more, because that goes hand in hand, in my opinion, with buying status symbols in the section that should just totally disappear from your spending straight away. If you're spending a couple of quid a weekend while you're watching the football with your friends, then fine, that's not really going to make a difference. If you don't know how much you're spending on gambling, have a look overall how much you're spending per month, and you might find that's a lot more than you thought. Gambling is a loser's game. There is only one winner. It's not you. If you try to cut out gambling and you find that you can't, then you might be addicted. It's a very addictive thing. So there is help out there. I'm not an expert on addiction, so I won't go any further into that. But if you find yourself trying to stop gambling and you can't, then I would suggest seeking help there. Gambling with some people is the difference between being poor and being wealthy. Some people spend hundreds a month on gambling, and if you could stop that and invest that money instead, that alone could be the difference. When you're looking through your bank statements to work out where you're spending your money, you might find that a lot of your money is being spent on servicing debts. It's really common. Loads of people have credit cards, loans, car PCPs. Firstly, I recommend avoiding debt wherever you can. My first car was a banger. I had a decent job, I had money, and I could have easily got a car loan to buy a fancy car, but instead I paid $3,000 for an old Ford Fiesta. It was a bit scruffy, but it got me where I needed to go. It never broke down. I never spent a penny on fixing it, so I loved it because it was so reliable. Then I started my own business, and after a couple of years of that, I realized that I was turning up to clients' homes to give them financial advice in a banger, and I thought it might not look professional enough. And it's kind of a shame, but I had this internal battle where I didn't want to get rid of me banger because I knew that it was actually financially a good thing. But I knew also that it didn't really look professional, and I should probably have a more professional car with my company branding on it. So I decided to upgrade still to another Fiesta, just a less old, less scruffy one. If you were in a position where you can drive a car that's a bit scruffy but still does the job, then absolutely do so. If you can buy a car cash and avoid taking out a car finance, that could be hundreds of pounds per month difference. And again, that alone can be the difference between you getting wealthy or staying poor. A few £100 a month invested can make you very, very wealthy in 20, 30, 40 years. Now, avoiding debt is easier than getting out of debt once you're in it. So if you're already in debt, when you're looking through your bank statements and you're working out where you can save money, those savings need to go on repaying debt before anything else. Shortly, I'll be talking about saving and investing, but first we need to get out of debt because that is the main thing that keeps people poor. So if you've looked through your bank statements and you've found that you can save £300 a month, we want to spend that spare £300 a month on getting out of debt. Normally, I'll say to start with whichever debt has the highest interest, because that's the most expensive debt. That's the one that's pulling you back more than anything. However, in some cases, you might find that there's one debt that's smaller than the others. You might find that you want to repay that one first because it's a small win. And sometimes that can help. So if that's the case, if you've got a credit card with just a few £100 on it, but the others all have thousands on, you might want to start with that credit card just so you can get that first small win. That can absolutely help with the confidence But other than that, if that's not the case, then you definitely want to just start with whichever one's got the highest interest rate. It might feel slow at first. Like the other elements of finance, it's all about time and patience. You might be so far in debt that you think that you can never get out of it, and paying off £300 a month might even feel like it's not really making a dent, but it is. It just takes time. You need to be paying back more than the minimum payment, especially if it's on credit cards. You need to be paying back as much as you can, really, as quickly as you can, to get out of debt as soon as possible. Because once you are out of debt, you're going to have so much more spare money to start building wealth, because you're no longer servicing these debts. And that could free up a lot of money every month to start building real wealth. But start with getting rid of the debt. Hopefully you were able to reduce your spending, but also ideally you can increase your income. Your income is important, but it's not magic. It's not everything. And you don't have to have a super high salary to build wealth. Increasing your income. So that could mean starting your own business. It might mean asking for more responsibility at work in exchange for a higher salary. It might mean changing roles completely. It might mean taking a second job. It might mean acquiring new skills. And that brings us back to learning. The learning should never stop. We talk about laziness as a bad thing. It's bad to be lazy, but laziness is actually totally normal. We evolved to be lazy. And the reason for that is humans thousands of years ago couldn't go wasting their energy. They needed to keep their energy, only use their energy if necessary, because you never know when you're going to need to run away from a lion. But now that's not going to happen, and it is okay to use up all of your energy. And if you get too tired, you can go to sleep knowing that you're not going to get eaten. So people will often not use their energy unless something motivates them to do so, unless there's something they are unhappy about that they want to change. So if you've got a job that's just enough to pay the bills, to keep a roof over your head and eat food, then you're less likely to be motivated to change anything. The same way you're less likely to be motivated to change your eating routine or your exercise routine if you're already happy with your weight. But once you become unhappy with your weight, you're more likely to change something. It's about your reference level, what you class as acceptable. If you change what you class as acceptable, you are much more likely to find an improvement. So if you start to want a better physique, you're much more likely to start going to the gym. And if you start to want higher income, you're much more likely to start looking out for better income. But what makes you want higher income? Because if everything's already paid, if the bills are paid and you've got enough money to go on holiday once a year and you're warm, you've got food to eat, then what's the point in looking for more money? You need to want to be wealthy to get wealthy. And a lot of people, although it sounds strange, don't really want that because they don't think it's possible. If they thought it was possible, then they would think about it being something that they want. But a lot of people think that building wealth is not possible. And the reason for that, it's the reference level. They might not know anyone who's wealthy. And this is why you'll get groups of friends who might all earn a lot of money. You might have a group of friends and they're all on something like £100,000, and then another group of friends who are all on minimum wage. And the reason for that is when you're in a group of friends and your friends earning £100,000, you think, wow, that's possible. I didn't know that was possible, but now I see that it is. I want that too. But if you don't have that, you might think that it's not possible. You might think, well, £100,000, I'm never going to earn that much. I don't know anyone who earns that much. So it's less likely to happen. It's about your reference level and what you class as normal and also what you class as acceptable. So if you change that reference level and if you decide that just paying the bills is no longer enough, no longer acceptable, you're much more likely to be able to find a way to increase your income. Learning to change your perception of what's possible can be life-changing. Once you do something that you didn't realize was possible, you start to wonder what else could also be possible. There are so many people who've been in the same job for such a long time who don't really enjoy the job, and they're not really that happy with the income either. It's not enough to build real wealth, but it is enough to just pay the bills. So they accept it and they don't look for anything better. And to me, that's crazy, because if you're not truly happy, it's just acceptable, why not at least look in your spare time for something better? But most people don't do that. And it's firstly because they've decided this is acceptable and they just roll with it. And secondly, because they think that better is impossible. They think of building wealth is impossible and just not for them, only for the other people that they've heard about but never met. In 1954, Roger Bannister ran a mile in less than 4 minutes. Up until then, people had assumed that that was impossible. People just said that running a mile in less than 4 minutes was just beyond human capability. It was just beyond the threshold of what humans can achieve. And then Roger Bannister did it. 46 days later, it was done again. Now, over 2,000 athletes have done it. Once people know something is possible, they can actually try to achieve it and often succeed. Real wealth is achievable, and in your spare time, you should absolutely be striving for more if you want more. Across different surveys with different results, around 8 in 10 adults said they like the idea of running their own business and working for themselves, but nowhere near 80% of adults run their own business. That might be partly because of what we were just talking about, where if you're already comfortable, you're less likely to seek out more. But it's also down to loss aversion. The fear of loss is greater than the desire for more. People's fear of losing their guaranteed salary and getting things wrong is greater than their desire to build their own business. That's just human nature, and there's nothing we can really do to change that. But if you're one of those people who thinks that you would like to start your own business one day, then if you're not already, I would recommend at least starting by reading business books and learning about how it works and thinking about what type of business you might start if you were to start a business. Now, starting a business is not for everyone. And I'm not saying it's without risk. I'm not saying it's super easy. But some people also overthink it and think that they have to come up with some incredible invention in order to start a business. And that's just not the case. A few weeks ago, I went to a burger shop that ran out of burger buns. I know nothing about burger shops, but I know I could run a better burger shop than that burger shop. Because if I ran a burger shop, I wouldn't run out of bread buns. Income is important, but without the right mindset, it doesn't make a difference. Most people will experience lifestyle creep. As their salary increases, their spending increases too. That is key. You need to make sure that doesn't happen, and it's all about having the right mindset, being patient, delaying gratification. Hopefully, you were lucky enough to be able to spend less than you earn. You'll probably have to make sacrifices, but hopefully you can manage that. And if so, it's time to start building wealth. The first thing you need to do is the boring part. Save. Before you start doing the other more exciting but still boring stuff like investing in the stock market, property, gold, cryptocurrency, you need savings. How much savings? Well, it depends on your circumstances, but generally we say 6 months living expenses. Most people skip this part, and that's a mistake. Having savings stops you from panicking, from selling investments at the worst time, and from taking high interest debt on when something goes wrong. Once you've got your savings, the next step is to invest. And this is where wealth is built. Now, if you've followed the previous steps, you'll probably already have an idea of what you want to invest in because, of course, you've been learning. But diversification is key. Diversification can mean a few things, but it essentially means spreading your bets. So You can diversify across different asset classes, and you can diversify within asset classes. Let me explain what that means. Diversifying across different asset classes would mean investing in the stock market and property and commodities like gold and silver and cryptocurrency. You don't have to have them all at once, but ideally you want to diversify across different asset classes. Don't just choose one. Investing in property, actual property ownership, can require more capital. Generally, if you want to purchase a property as a buy-to-let, an investment property, you'll need to put down around 25%. So if you want to purchase a £100,000 property, you're going to need 25 grand plus all of the fees that go with that purchase. The other ones are a little bit easier to invest in, small amounts monthly. Then you want to diversify within asset classes. So to use the stock market as an example, I have a stocks and shares lifetime ISA, also a normal stocks and shares ISA, and also a pension. Through those platforms, I invest in things like global tracker funds that invest in thousands of companies all over the world. So if one company fails, that doesn't kill my investment. It barely matters at all. Now, some people don't do this. Some people just choose a certain company that they believe in, or a few companies. That is much higher risk. That is not diversification. You can also diversify within other asset classes. For example, if you're lucky enough to own several properties, diversifying there might look like purchasing different types of properties or different properties in different areas of the country. There is no best asset. Everyone has a favorite. Mine is the stock market. I believe that over time, the stock market will probably beat property. But I invest in property too because I might be wrong. That is the whole point of diversification. If you can invest in these things every month and keep doing it and be patient, the chances are you will build serious wealth. The reason you'll probably build serious wealth is compound interest. And this is the part that so many people don't understand and they underestimate. Let me give you an example. If you invested £300 per month over 30 years, let's assume you got 7% returns, which is quite conservative based on the last 100 years of stock market returns. £300 a month over 30 years would become £365,000. And that is from putting in £108,000 yourself over 30 years. The rest is compound interest. No trading, no genius, no timing the market and getting lucky or being super clever, just compound interest with time. If you want to get rich through investing, this might be the most boring part, but it's also one of the most important. Watch out for the fee monster. Fees are something that so many people forget about because they sound small and they can make a massive difference to your long-term returns. There are two main ways people invest in the stock market: an index tracker fund or an actively managed fund. So we'll start with an actively managed fund. These funds pay professional managers to try to beat the market. And when I say beat the market, I just mean do better than the average return of the stock market in general. The market's measured using something called an index, which is basically a scoreboard. So if the global market goes up 7% in a year, that's the global market. So just on average, the different stock markets from around the world, on average, if they go up 7% a year and your actively managed fund returns 9%, then your fund has beaten the market. But if yours only gets 5% returns, then it's underperformed. So actively managed funds pay fund managers to make these big decisions. Which countries to invest in, which sectors to avoid, which individual companies do they like and think are going to perform well. They're making predictions about the future. So that means teams of analysts, lots of buying and selling, and higher costs. You might pay, for example, a 1% a year fee for an actively managed fund. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but it can be. And shortly, I'm going to give you an example. First, I'm going to explain an index tracker, like a global or world tracker. A world tracker doesn't try to beat the market. It just tries to be the market. It follows rules rather than opinions. Those rules might be something like own the biggest companies in the world in proportion to their size. So massive companies like Apple and Microsoft will make up a bigger part of the fund. Smaller companies will make up a smaller part, but the companies will be spread out all over the world, so you are diversified. If a company grows, it naturally becomes a bigger part of the fund. If it shrinks or disappears, then it fades out from the fund over time. So there's no guessing, there's no stock picking, there's no trying to be clever. It's just following rules. And because of that, world trackers are cheap to run. So it's common for the fees to be really low. For example, the fee on the world tracker that I invest in is 0.13%. So if we look at that example from earlier, and let's say you get 7% interest per year, you invest £300 per month for 30 years, you'd have £365,000. If you change that 7% return to 6% return per year, because you've lost 1% in fees, that 365 grand becomes 301 grand. So it's a massive difference with just such a small fee. That's the same market, the same contributions. The only difference is the fees. That money didn't vanish. It's just been paid to somebody else for managing a fund. Now, actively managed funds try to beat the market. And there is a lot of research that's been done already that shows, in general, it's rare for an actively managed fund to succeed in beating the market. So that's why I only invest in tracker funds. The same math applies if you pay a wealth manager or a financial advisor. So if you pay somebody to manage your investments for you, they are going to charge you a fee. For example, let's say they charge you 1% per year. Then you're also going to pay the fees of whatever funds you're investing in. So let's say you're paying 2% a year. That could make a massive, massive difference because you're paying a professional to do it for you. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. For complex situations like tax planning, pensions, inheritance, good advice can be worth every penny. But for simple, long-term investing, fees matter a lot. And that's why I do it myself through ISAs, lifetime ISAs, and pensions. Which brings me on to the next part, which is how to actually invest, what platforms. I've mentioned ISAs, lifetime ISAs, pensions, so I'm going to just explain that briefly. Now, these only apply to the UK. In the UK, you can open a stocks and shares ISA. You can invest up to £20,000 a year into ISAs, and all of the growth is tax-free. So that £365,000 that you've got from investing in the stock market over 30 years, when you take that out, you're not going to pay tax on that. The gains are tax-free. So in that example, your profit was 257 grand. And when you take that out, that's tax-free. So that's the beauty of an ISA. There's also something called a lifetime ISA where you can invest up to £4,000 per year. That £4,000 is included in your £20,000 per year ISA allowance, so bear that in mind. But if you invest into a lifetime ISA, the government adds a 25% bonus. So the government is giving you free money. Now, the money in your lifetime ISA can only be accessed if you were buying your first home or if you're over 60. If you want to take it out earlier, you pay big fees and you might get back less than what you put in. So these are not as flexible as a normal stocks and shares ISA where you can take the money out whenever you want. These are going to be to plan to buy your first home or plan for retirement long term. If you invest in a lifetime ISA, you need to be prepared for that money to be kept in there long term. If you want to invest in the stock market through your ISA or lifetime ISA, you must make sure you get a stocks and shares ISA or a stocks and shares lifetime ISA and not a cash ISA or cash lifetime ISA. Finally, don't ignore pensions. Pensions are also crucial. If you're employed, make sure you're enrolled in the workplace pension. Employer contributions are literally free money. If you're self-employed or run a limited company, pensions can be incredibly tax efficient. Many people use a combination: ISAs for flexibility, pensions for tax efficiency. When it comes to choosing a lifetime ISA or a stocks and shares ISA, I can't tell you exactly which ones to open. Fees will be different across different companies, different providers, but they'll change from time to time. So they're not always going to stay the same. So just do your research, look at the fees for the provider, how much you're going to pay that provider per year. Some might even be fee free, but also look at the funds that you can invest in through that provider and look at what the fees will be for those funds. So do they have a global index fund with really low fees that you can invest in through their platform? Any good stocks and shares ISA will have an option to invest in low fee index funds. But do your research before you choose. Once you've started doing all of this, we're back to mindset. Markets will crash. Property prices might dip. Tenants could cause you problems. If you focus on the short term, you'll panic. If you focus on the long term and stay patient, you will win. When I first started investing, progress felt very slow. But that was 8 years ago, and time flies, and that 8 years has flown by. And now I look at my investments and I thank my younger self for starting quite early. I wish I started earlier. If you start in your 20s, you have an incredible advantage. If you start in your 30s, real wealth is still very achievable. If you start in your 40s, it's harder, but still not impossible. The earlier you start, the longer you've got for compound interest to do what it does. And that is how you build wealth. The key is getting started. A lot of people say that they're going to do it eventually, and then they leave it too late. And by the time they start, they've lost out on a lot of the potential returns. So get started straight away if you want to build real wealth. Getting rich isn't exciting, but it's also not complicated. It's simple. Simple doesn't mean easy. It's not easy because most people don't have the patience. And doing the same boring thing over and over again, long-term, consistently, is not easy. Most people can't do it. If you can, you will build wealth. It's about patience, consistency, boring decisions over and over again. Not buying the sexy stuff, but investing in the boring stuff that's going to build you wealth. Boring, done well, over time, builds real wealth, and wealth gives you freedom. If you can be consistent and patient, you will build wealth and you will have a financially free life.